Well, good morning, Crossing Church. How are you doing this morning? Doing good? It's cold outside. It's warm in here. Holy Spirit's in here. God's people are in here. I want to welcome all of our campuses that are joining all through this region. We're so thankful for you. If you're joining inside online.tv, thankful for you. I'm especially thankful for all the people that showed up last week in the middle of a blizzard. There were 4,300 and some of you, and thanks for braving the weather. You know what's incredible is when you can have a blizzard in the Midwest and you still have 4 baptisms. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. There was another 5,400 of you that joined online, and you know what that tells me is that, you know, just being with the Lord, spending time in His Word together, you don't want to let weather take that away from you, and so you took advantage of that. I'm thankful for that. And God's doing great things through this series, and it's Just a Phase, so don't miss it. You know, don't blow it. Don't waste it. Don't let it get past you. Don't miss this phase. A lot of people say, you know, it's a phase. They'll get over it. But we want to capture it. We want to make it the Lord's. We want to make it ours like never, ever before. And we started this. We're in the 3rd week of this series. When we started it, we were just talking about showing up. You know, if we want to be present in the lives of our kids and our grandkids, we just need to show up. And when we do that, amazing things happen. We talked about Nehemiah in that first week and how he energized parents, moms, and dads in a time of what could have been, you know, just a real horrible time with a half-built wall and people outside wanting to invade. And when he mobilized those parents, they got busy and they were building with one hand and they were holding a sword in the other, and nobody wanted to mess with mom and dad when they're defending their own home. And that project was completed, and the people that needed to not try to take over didn't, and it was an incredible story. So they showed up. Moms and dads are powerful when they stand in the gap for their kids, and grandparents and aunts and uncles. And what we did after that was we concentrated, beginning last week, on these 6 equations. We did the first 3 last week. I want to remind you what they were. And the first one is time over time. When we spend time with our kids and we do that over a period of time, you're actually writing their history. And that's consequential. That's a big deal, right? And we want to write the best, the greatest history. The second thing we learned was this, that love over time equals worth. Love might be cheap, but when you do love consistently over time, what that does is it helps a young person to realize just how valuable they are, not just to you, but also to God. The third one we talked about was this, words over time, and what they do is they provide direction. We want our kids and our grandkids, the people that we can impact that are younger than us, to have the world's best direction in their life. And when we give them the right words, that's accomplished. So what we're doing with these things is we're taking advantage of these phases. Let's redefine what a phase is. Let's do that again. A phase is a time frame in a kid's life when you can leverage distinctive opportunities to influence a kid's future. And I would imagine most of us can point to an adult, somebody that was older than us, that poured into our lives in a very profound way when we needed a role model that wasn't mom and dad. So it doesn't matter if you're a parent or a grandparent here or you don't have any kids of your own. You have an opportunity to pour in to young people that are around you. My brother did that in a powerful way in my life. He was a mentor to me. There's a lot of things that you see in my life that are direct reflection of him. Through those phases of life, he really helped. There was a lot of people like that that poured into my kids' life, and I owe them a debt that I can never repay. I appreciate that. We need to do that for each other. So these 6 ways, and we're going to discuss the next 3 today, are what every child and every teenager truly needs. So here's the 4th one today. What we're going to talk about is stories. Now, we're not just talking about stories. We're talking about stories over time. I love stories. How many of you love a good story? Yeah. I mean, we're searching on Netflix for them, right? Have you kind of burned out Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, and now you're like down in the like the dredges, like you're looking for something? Yeah, because we're just always hungry for a good story. You ask any teacher, you ask any marketer, politician, journalist, photographer, the story's everything. They want a story, right? And when you put story over time, something amazing happens. That's what we're going to talk about, because it expands a child's imagination, and then it changes their perspective in a positive way. There are 3 different kinds of stories we tell our kids and our grandkids. The first one is family stories. How many of you got family stories? Oh, yeah. We've got all kinds of family stories. You know what my kids do? I've taken my kids on some pretty epic vacations. They never tell stories about the good ones. They only tell stories about the bad ones. And like the really bad ones. Like, you remember when we had to watch Rango 6 times in a row because there was nothing to do? Do you remember when? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And those are the ones that they never seem to want to forget. But even the bad memories become good memories when they become stories. Whether I'm talking about them or they're talking. I mean, you have stories like that? Do you have smelly uncle that visits every so often, like when family comes over and you tell stories about that? Do you? I actually had a smelly uncle, if you're wondering. Nobody even thinks that's funny. How about food? Do you have food stories? Like there are certain times of the year where you have to serve certain kinds of foods because that's what you serve at that time of the year, and everybody hates it, but you still have to eat it because somebody at some time back in history. Yeah, we all have family stories, and what they do is they create a relational history that children need, gives them a perspective about their identity. This is who I am, and they know who they are because of where they came from. It helps them to define where they are right now, and it becomes a big part of their future and the family's future, right? We don't want to lose those family stories. Here's another kind of story, cultural stories. Now, we all have cultural stories, right? I mean, when I moved to Quincy, I heard a lot about Maid-Rite. Why is that funny? You know why that's funny. I grew up in Speedway, Indiana, and there was a lot more talk about White Castle. You know, I mean, so there were cultural stories. You live in a particular town, and maybe there's a particular place to eat in town, or you go to school, and there's all that history in your school, whether it's in the sports department or the drama department, right? There are stories. There are all of these cultural stories. And why are cultural stories important? Why is it important to have a child involved in that? Well, because when you have cultural stories, your world gets bigger. All of a sudden, there's a context, right? And it builds their view of the world around them, and it creates an empathy for people that are around them. Really is valuable. The third kind of story that we tell are Bible stories. Now, I said that one third, but it's really the most important of all 3. I want us to understand who God is. We tell Bible stories because it helps you to explain things that really aren't explainable. You know, the Bible's not just a book. It's a whole library. It's 66 books that they were written by over 40 authors over a 1,600-year period. And of course, you're reading stories about people that lived as nomads and people that were kings and priests and fishermen. But all of those stories together are combined to tell one story, and that story is a love that God had for the children that He created through time. And He proved that love through Jesus Christ. If you don't have Bible stories in your life, if kids grow up without Bible stories, they can't connect to the greatest mysteries of the universe. They have an inability to understand a God who's so creative and so loving that He could create this universe and love us in the midst of it. They would miss out on their spiritual history and how important it is, a spiritual history, to creating a foundation for our faith. Stories over time, they matter because they provide kids with a relational, a cultural, and a spiritual context to shape their perspective about God, about faith, about values, about life. And when you tell stories over time, what it does, it energizes a child's imagination in such a way that it'll actually shape their perspective. Now, how many of you understand that perspective is critically important? And that's the equation. Stories over time equal perspective. So what does that have to do with you? I want you to reimagine yourself just for a little bit. Imagine yourself a little less as a parent or a grandparent or a critical adult. I want you to imagine yourself as a storyteller, as a story collector. Do that. You're the producer. You're the director. You're the librarian. You're the photojournalist. And you're the publisher. You're always looking for the next story because they're so critical. Stories are going to enable kids to have a much richer history. They're going to help them to understand that this is God's brilliant idea. You remember when we talked last week about love and how love over time creates this platform, that time is a platform for us to understand God's love? And if He created time as a platform to understand love, maybe He created stories so that collectively it would give us a deeper perspective about God's principles and about His truth. I don't want you to underestimate the power of a kid's imagination. Stories over time can collectively work to build a child's emotional, relational, and moral intelligence. I want you to think about them fighting a dragon with a hobbit. I want you to think about them defeating a wizard in the epic struggle over good and evil. I want you to think about them traveling with a little girl named Lucy through a wardrobe into a mysterious frozen land. And their imagination is unleashed. They see more. They care more. They hope more. It actually holds a key, imagination, to how our faith develops. Do you know why that's true? Because imagination energizes faith to help us see things you can't see. Like, there's so many things in the Bible that can only be understood or captured through imagination, and it comes through story, right? It helps kids to imagine things that they could never see or have never seen. And that's why this is so important, right? It helps them to embrace a complex truth, to envision a reality that's related to an ancient story of faith instead of a contemporary one. I mean, you're going to have to encourage a child's imagination. Stories do that. Think about this for a second, okay? You open up the Bible to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and you're reading, and it's talking about God creating the universe. He's creating the world. So, He's creating light and darkness. He's creating dry land and sea. He's creating plants. He's separating the water below from the water above. He's creating animals. And then He creates man. And in Genesis 2, it gets into a narrative of how He's actually fashioning a man and forming him, and then how He's making the woman and how He's bringing the woman to the man. And how in the world can you understand this on the printed page unless you're actually applying your imagination to it? Your imagination takes something that's a narrative and turns it into something visual, right? You start to see it. You go a few more chapters and you get into the book of Exodus, and you're reading a story about an 80-year-old man who's tending sheep, and he sees something off in the distance that's kind of shiny or sparkling, and he gets a little closer to it because it's a strange sight. And as he gets closer, he realizes that this is actually a bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. And as he draws close, he hears the voice of God saying, "Take your sandals off, Moses, because the place where you're standing is holy ground." And he's listening to the voice of God. And how do you understand that without an imagination? How can you understand Jesus going from town to town, village to village, healing people, making lame people walk and blind people see and deaf people hear and raising the dead, unless you're incorporating your imagination? Imagination empowers your faith. How can you look at the book of Revelation and hear about the splendor and the wonder of heaven unless you're utilizing your imagination, and how these words just jump off of the printed page, how they become real in the context of this? God gave us an imagination so we could imagine things that were unimaginable. It sparks our creative senses and our emotions. They move us. Stories move us. And they have the power to stretch our perspective when it comes to God. That's why stories over time equals perspective. You need an example for that? How about Jesus? Look what it says in Matthew 13:34, that Jesus spoke all of these things to the crowd in parables. You know what parables are? They're just little stories. He didn't say anything to them without using a parable. See, God created your imagination as a context that He could download into and help you to understand the deep things of faith. And as parents and as grandparents, it is important that we learn this lesson from Jesus. We would be smart to do the same thing, because the stories you tell, they matter. You're inviting kids and teenagers into a much bigger narrative. And you know what happens when you tell stories? You relate stories. It pulls them into the story. Or do I have to remind you about the Princess Bride? It pulls you in. It prepares young people to face whatever happens. It compels them to take risks. It challenges them to do something significant in their lives. It moves them to keep believing that the good will eventually win over evil. So I want to encourage you to read stories and watch stories and tell stories and create stories and write stories and illustrate stories and film stories and live stories and collect stories, because stories over time equals perspective. They'll give you a richer history. They'll transform their perspective into the one that God wants. They'll make their life fuller and their faith deeper and their hope stronger. Stories over time will help them to imagine a world that is beyond them. That's an important one, number 4. Here's number 5. And let me talk about what it entails. Every kid needs people, right? You can't just isolate a child. Every child needs people. Just people need people. Everybody needs some sort of a circle. And so this is what we're going to call it. We're going to call it a tribe. And when you put a tribe over time, something, again, amazing happens. So what is a tribe? Let me define tribe, all right? There are a lot of definitions, but it's whatever people have in common with each other. That usually defines a tribe. So it might be ancestry, ideas, experiences, politics, theology, sports, right? And then we define ourselves by that. So we say, well, I'm a musician, or I'm a business owner, or I'm a believer, or I'm a sports fan, I'm a photographer, I'm a foodie, I'm an adventurer, I'm a mom, I'm a student, I'm a biker, I'm a foster parent, I'm an Asian, I'm a blogger. Are you getting this? There are things that are common that we share. Now, tribes are just people who share something in common, but when you put tribes over time, then something emerges. Tribes over time start defining family. They start defining community. That's why everything that we do over time matters so much. When you help kids to feel welcomed in a tribe over a period of time, they develop this critical aspect, which is a sense of belonging. And that's the fifth equation. It's this: tribes over time equal belonging. Just like stories were critical and God's idea, so were tribes. I mean, you can't read very far in the Bible to start reading about families, and then families move into tribes, and then tribes become nations, right? And everything is written inside that context. And God did that to spread His message of love, because that's what the Bible is in totality. During the time of Jesus, the Pharisees really missed the central idea of a tribe, because tribes were always designed to be inclusive, not exclusive, to help people feel welcomed and that know that they were accepted and they were loved by God. But it seems like the Pharisees during the time of Jesus were intent on making it exclusive instead of inclusive. And that's one of the reasons they hated Jesus, because Jesus took all the people who were excluded and moved them to being included, right? That God loved everybody. So if you're a tax collector or a prostitute or a sinner of some kind, Jesus was out there and He was saying, you belong. And people were joining Him because of that. And He was challenged by that, by the Pharisees once. And He told 3 stories right next to each other. And the first, or parables, the first one He told was about 100 sheep and a shepherd. And he lost 1 sheep, and then he went out and he searched for the other sheep and brought that sheep back to the 99. And then he told a second story right after that about a woman who had 10 coins and lost one, spent the whole day cleaning her house to find that one lost coin. And when she did, she threw a party because she had found that one lost coin. And then he finished with this third story about a man who had 2 sons. Isn't it interesting? He went from 100 to 10 to 1. Just narrowing and zeroing in on these people. We know the story of the prodigal son who he left home prematurely. He was the second son, so he wasn't going to get the birthright. He wasn't going to get the blessing. He wasn't going to get the double portion. And so he wanted his inheritance early. He wanted to go try his hand out in the world. Wanted to find new friends. He wanted to leave his mark on the world, but it wasn't a happy story. It was a sad one. You know, there was a series of wrong decisions that he'd made, and the end of that was he lost all his money and everything else. And then he finds himself in a pig pen longing to eat what the pigs are eating, right? And there came this moment when he said, let me go home. I've had my run, baby. I'm done. I got to go home. Or is that Michael Bublé? Anyway, the people right up here are still awake, and the rest of you, I don't know. I can imagine, think about it. Now use your imagination from story and imagine that son saying, hey, the servants get treated better at my house, where I came from, than I'm feeling right now. I'll go back to my father and say, I don't belong in your family and just make me a hired servant. And I'm sure from working at the pigs, he is dirty and disheveled and he stinks and he's awful. And then you get this picture. You get this picture of this son coming over the last hill and a picture of Dad on the porch. Now, it doesn't say porch. It doesn't say that he's in a porch swing. It doesn't say anything about him peering. But my imagination makes all of those words jump off the page. And when he's still just a speck on the horizon, Dad recognizes him and runs, jumps out of that porch swing and starts running down the road. It's the only time in the whole Bible that God, the Father, is ever depicted as running. And it's important that you understand that He's running to someone like you, someone like me. He rushes to meet him and he throws his arms around him. He doesn't care about the dirt. He doesn't care about the smell, the odor, the past, all that stuff. Because as far as Dad was concerned, my son was lost and now he's found. What's he saying to his son? He's saying tribe matters. So what does he do? He does 2 things. He gives him a ring and he throws him a party. And what does that ring symbolize? Well, it signified being part of a family. And what does a party symbolize? Well, it symbolized being part of a community, right? And he wanted to send his son a clear message. There's a seat for you at our table. This place is where you're from. This place is where you're known. You're welcome here. You're forgiven here. You belong here. And that kind of belonging is something that only a tribe can actually do. And so we have tribes right now. You're sitting in a tribe right now. All of our locations, each location is a tribe, right? Church is a tribe. Family is a tribe. School is a tribe. And teenagers and children desperately need people who know them, who welcome them, who will forgive them, so that over time they recognize that they belong. Everybody wants to be known by someone, right? We need to know that regardless of whatever failure we have in our lives, that we still have a place where we belong. And this idea of belonging is actually endemic to our faith. It's part of being a Christian because it's the concept of grace, right? What is grace? Grace, you could define it this way. You don't belong because you deserve it. You don't belong because you deserve to belong. You belong because God has accepted you and has forgiven you, period. That's what grace is. I want you to think about the advantage of growing up with that and how different it is when you don't grow up with that. Think about kids who don't grow up with a concept of grace. And how much does that impact the rest of their life? But when you grow up with the concept of grace, you grow up with belonging, right? You're welcomed into your tribe. God's trying to teach you that you're welcomed into His tribe. That's belonging. When we put this into a kid's life when they're young, it has a dramatic impact when they're older. It's always better if we can do this as young rather than as old. The grace of God is better understood when they're young, and then it can be fleshed out when they're old. That's why helping them to understand to trust Christ early in life should be a first priority. You know, it's amazing how some of us really think that basketball is a first priority or A's and B's is a first priority, when really the first priority is for your kids to understand who and whose they are, regardless of performance. I want you to think about that. The stakes are really high. And there's nobody who knows you better than your family. And when you're forgiven by family, then you're forgiven, right? Because I always have a place I can run back to. That's why we need tribes over time. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2. This is about tribes. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. We understand that better when we're around people that we have history with, people who know us and we know them. Kids need to know that they're known before they can feel like they're welcome, right? So when they show up and they're all broken up, right, and they're lonely and they're wounded, they still know that they have a seat at your table. Have you ever shown up that way in your family? Have you ever had your kids show up that way? I've had my kids show up that way. And I want to be the kind of leader that reminds my kids that they still have a ring on their finger and there's still a party waiting for them. That they haven't been disqualified. That's the fifth thing. Sixth thing, every kid needs is fun. I'm glad I waited on this one. They need fun. Because when you put fun over time, something amazing happens. Now, you know what? It's okay to have fun. It's okay to have fun in church. I grew up at a different time, and my parents were older parents when I was born. My dad was 50 when I was born. My mom was 42. So it's almost like I was being raised by my grandparents when I was being raised by my parents. And I was raised in a time where if something was good for you, it had to hurt or taste bad. How many of you can, yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I can remember having medicine forced down my throat. And it was like, it's good for you. And I go, but I'm gagging on it. It's terrible. So I was like, that's because it's good for you. And that same idea translated into the church. A church was a place where you were supposed to be quiet and you need to be like a ninja if you were a kid. Because if you weren't, something bad was going to happen. They're going to take you to the old sanctuary and do something, and kids never come back from there. I mean, it was a fearful place. I've been in churches in Quincy, Illinois, and I know I'm talking to a bunch of different, but you can relate to this, where it seems like every surface in the sanctuary, in the lobby, is a hard surface, so it just makes more noise. So like when you walk in, you have to go like this. And when you're a kid, are you kidding me? I want to run. I want to scream. I want to play. I want to play tag. I want to play, right? I want to have fun. And that usually, that doesn't work in church because church isn't a place that you can have fun. Oh, wrong. Wrong. Fun is a context where you can actually build a lasting relationship with a child, right? When you think about spending time with kids and teenagers, you need to find a context where you can play. You need to play ball, and you need to play games. You need to have a playroom. You need to play make-believe. You need to play hide and seek, play on the PlayStation, play some cards, play act, go to the playground, get out some Play-Doh. That's enough, Jerry. Stop. To put it simply, you want to stay connected with your kids, then you're going to need to learn how to have fun with them. And what do I mean by fun? I mean anything that entertains, that makes them laugh, helps them to enjoy life. Fun is a really big deal. At first glance, it might seem trivial. I mean, we've been talking about time and love and words and stories and tribes. But when you put fun over time, something amazing happens. And you know what it is? It's connection. It takes your friendship with a kid to a much deeper level than before. And when you have fun over time, it does this. And this is our sixth equation. Fun over time equals connection. Now, I know snow was bad. Snow was bad this last week, right? We had to shovel that snow. We had to work out, how are we going to get out? It's so dangerous. But you know what kids were thinking? They were thinking snow day, snowman, sledding, snowball fight, snow fort. What were they thinking about? They were thinking about fun, right? Because they've got this gear inside of them that is play. I got to play. And some of us don't think that God created us to play. God created everything in the universe to play. If you don't think that God created us to play, go buy a dog and get a ball. And the dog's going to nudge you to throw the ball. And then you're going to go throw the ball, and it's going to come back. Why is it doing that? Because it's trying to get a workout? If a dog knows how to play, we ought to know how to play. And we don't want to forget how to play. It's our responsibility to give our children an environment where they can have joy and excitement. And if you get too serious, you might have a serious problem. You may need a fun adjustment or a fun adjustment. Right? I don't want us to be Johnny Raincloud. I don't want us to be the resident fun sucker in a room. And Christians can be horrible at this. I mean, they can be terrible at this. I remember when I was doing youth ministry, we had a group of parents that got all up in arms because I let my kids go out on Halloween and get candy and dress up. And it was like, well, that's the holiday of Satan. And I'm like, Yeah, but it's fun. No, I didn't mean yeah. No, I didn't actually do that. I didn't do that. Okay, I'm going to get letters now. No. I used to sit out on the front porch on the porch swing disguised as a dummy. Don't say anything. Kind of like this. And everybody, and all these little kids come up on the porch and they'd be going, look at that silly looking dummy. I thought, that's not even scary. And I go, ah! Because it's fun. It's fun. And maybe the word fun isn't in the Bible, but every one of its relatives are. Right? May the righteous be glad. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Celebrate a festival to the Lord. A cheerful heart, it does good like a medicine. The fruit of the Spirit is love and joy. And however many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. Don't make the mistake of thinking that fun's a waste of time, because fun over time can do incredible things for your relationship with your kids. Look at what it says in John 15. Jesus, he's on the eve of his death on a cross, and he says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Fun over time actually convinces kids that you like them. They already know you love them. But when you play with them, they realize that you like them. And they'll probably never be sure that you like them until you start having fun with them. Fun over time reconnects what's been disconnected. You know what has incredible power to repair damage in a relationship? Have you ever had a kid who is really upset and the only thing you want to do is get them to laugh? And how they hate it when you do that? It's like, and they're like, and it just makes them madder. Until they break down. You know why? Because you can't be mad and laugh at the same time unless you're a girl who's tired. You know why you're laughing? Because it's true. Because girls that are tired can actually laugh cry. Like they can cry and laugh at the same time. That's so weird. You know, women are a mystery, gentlemen. Let's just understand that. But playfulness is an effective way to deal with things like tantrums and sibling rivalry and rebellion and anxiety. And what it does is it actually rebuilds trust in each other. It's an amazing thing. Fun over time also creates resilience. It fosters resilience because life is hard. You know it's not always going to be easy. There's going to be heartbreak and tragedy and disappointment. And if they have a collection of fun memories, it's going to reassure them that there's still joy in living and in loving and in laughing together. And a pain will eventually go away. And like the Bible says, but joy, it comes in the morning. It helps us to keep fighting for relationship, even when that relationship is hard and difficult. It authenticates forgiveness. Fun may actually be one of the best ways to prove that you've actually forgiven someone. You can say you forgive them and just avoid them, but if you start having fun with them again, it proves that you actually really meant it, right? Fun may not be the most important thing, but if you don't have it, a lot of other things in life really don't matter. If you love your kids, but you don't play with them, they're going to struggle understanding that you like them. If you give them words and stories that are boring, it's going to make them hard for them to listen to you. If you want to belong to a tribe that never laughs, I guarantee you they won't want to be a part of that tribe. But if you want to build trust and you want to have a lasting influence, you want to establish a deeper emotional connection, you need to make fun a priority. You know, there's an amazing verse in the Bible in Hebrews chapter 12. And it's talking about Jesus going to the cross, which doesn't sound like a fun thing, does it? But it says this, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. He endured the cross because of the joy set before him. And you were that joy. How many of you have either read or saw Peter Pan or some version of Peter Pan? Let me see your hands. What does it take to fly? It takes two things. You know what those two things are? Number one, I'm going to give you pixie dust. You can't fly without pixie dust. What's the second thing? Say it. A happy thought. You have to have pixie dust and you have to have a happy thought. I wonder if Jesus Christ is your happy thought. I wonder if those children following the way of the Lord is your happy thought. Because I can tell you this for sure, absolutely, right out of God's Word. You are Jesus' happy thought. We're moving to a time of decision.